They said the plague took only the guilty, but in the smoke of 1665 London, it was innocence that burned first. Midnight bells tolled across the city like a warning from the heavens, each peal trembling through alleys slick with soot and fear. Red crosses stained the doors of houses where entire families had fallen silent, and the air reeked of ash and the bitter tang of sickness. Rats scurried across cobbles, their slick bodies vanishing into gutters that ran black with the Thames' slow, contaminated tide. Beneath a moon veiled in smoke, a lone woman moved like a ghost through the deserted lanes. Marjorie Blythe kept her shawl tight against the chill, the coarse wool smelling faintly of dried lavender. In one hand she clutched a small basket of herbs, marigold, sage, a twist of rosemary, gathered from the last green corners of the city. Behind her padded 3 children, thin as wicks, eyes wide and hollow. Their parents had died within the week, and Marjorie could not turn them away. She led them to a shuttered doorway where a mother's moans seeped through the cracks. The woman inside had begged for her help. Marjorie's knowledge of roots and tinctures had once been a blessing, but now every step she took in service of mercy was shadowed by suspicion. From a window above, a candle flared, illuminating the sharp profile of Reverend Nathaniel Holt. He watched her like a hawk studying a mouse. Holt's sermons had grown more heated with the plague, each one a furnace of fury. He preached that God demanded sacrifices, that sin drew disease like rot draws flies. The crowd that gathered at St. Bride's each Sabbath swelled with terror, and he fed it gladly. When neighbors whispered that Marjorie's remedies worked better than prayer, his eyes hardened to flint. By dawn, rumors flew faster than the plague itself. They said Marjorie kept charms from Rome, relics of heathen Vestals who once tended eternal fire. They said the herbs she brewed were not for healing but for seduction of spirits. Children carried the tales to their mothers. Men repeated them over tankards of sour ale until the words sounded like truth. Holt fanned the embers, warning that ancient sins had returned to London in a woman's hands. Marjorie knew nothing of the Vestal virgins, only that her skills came from her grandmother, a wise woman from the fens. Yet when soldiers came to drag her from her small cottage, she offered no struggle. She placed a hand on the nearest child's head, a silent blessing, before they bound her wrists with coarse rope. The streets were empty as they marched her through, the city holding its breath. At the jail, the stench of decay clung to damp stone. Rats skittered over forgotten prayer books, their claws scratching a dirge against the walls. She was thrust into a cell where the only light came from a narrow slit, the dawn bleeding through like a wound. Holt visited at dusk, his dark cloak heavy with the scent of incense. He carried a lantern whose flame shivered in the draught. "Confess," he urged, voice low but sharp. "The fire you keep is not of God. Speak the names of your spirits, and perhaps the Lord will stay his hand." "I keep no fire but the hearth," Marjorie replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I speak no names but the Lord's." "Lies," he hissed. "Rome's whores fed their flame with chastity and deceit. You are cut from the same cloth." His eyes gleamed as if he had already won. "The city burns because of women like you." For 3 days she endured their questions. They asked of lovers, of midnight rites, of hidden relics. She gave them only silence and the faint smile of someone who knows truth will not bend. Outside, the plague worsened. Bells tolled without pause. Smoke from hastily built pyres drifted into the prison like the breath of the dead. When the sentence came, it was not the gallows nor the stake. Holt, citing some forgotten Roman law, decreed she must be buried alive. Blood must not be shed. The earth itself would pass judgment. The words fell like stones into a well. Even the soldiers shifted uneasily. But fear is a stronger chain than doubt. They led her through twisting catacombs beneath St. Bride's, the air damp and cold as a crypt. The children she had cared for followed until the guards pushed them back, their small fists beating against armor. A single chamber waited at the end, a hollow carved from ancient rock. A loaf of bread, a jug of water, and a single candle lay inside, a cruel echo of mercy. Marjorie stepped across the threshold without a word. The candle's flame licked her face, catching in her hair like threads of gold. For a moment she seemed almost luminous, more spirit than flesh. The children broke past the guards, their cries slicing the dark. They pressed their palms to the stone as the heavy slab began to slide into place. "Please," the eldest begged, voice cracking. "She saved us. She saved everyone she could." Holt did not meet their eyes. The stone ground shut with a sound like the world ending. The candle's light dwindled to a pinprick, then vanished. Silence fell, thick and absolute. Above, The city groaned beneath its plague. Smoke swallowed the spire of St. Paul's. The Thames rolled on, carrying its cargo of the dead. And in the secret earth beneath St. Bride's, a woman's breath slowed, then ceased, her name destined to be lost to every chronicle that claimed to keep the truth.
Across the sea, the same wind carried the same accusation, that a woman's silence was the devil's roar. The moon hung cold over Salem village, a white coin set in a black sky, its light silvering the bare trees and frosting the windows of the meeting house. Beneath the chill glow, the settlement slept in uneasy fragments, dreams fractured by whispers of witchcraft and a sickness no prayer could soothe. The river lay frozen, its glassy skin reflecting a world that seemed to have turned upside down. Abigail Corr stood alone at the edge of the woods, breath curling in the icy air. Her cloak, patched and threadbare, barely held back the bitter wind. In her palm rested a small bronze token, worn smooth with generations of touch, stamped with a faint figure of a woman holding fire. Her grandmother had pressed it into her hand before Abigail left England as a child, murmuring of a lineage older than kings and pastors. She had never spoken of it to anyone, but on nights when the sky was clear and the wind carried strange scents from the ocean, she knelt among the pines and whispered a prayer without words, letting silence become its own kind of flame. From the darkness came a sudden rustle. Mary Warren, her master's servant, stumbled into the clearing, cheeks flushed with cold and terror. "I saw you," she blurted, voice trembling like a frightened bird. "I saw you with the charm." Her eyes darted to the bronze token glinting in the moonlight. "They will say it's the devil's mark. You must throw it away." Abigail closed her fingers around the token. "It is nothing but old metal," she said, though her heartbeat thudded like a drum. "A remembrance." Mary shook her head, tears bright in the moonlight. "The magistrate listens for such things. They say the plague in London was born of women who kept Roman fires alive. They say their silence fed the pestilence. If they learn you keep that relic," she swallowed the rest. By morning the rumors had begun. A neighbor's child woke shrieking, fever burning through her small body. No poultice cooled her, no scripture eased her fits. Whispers darted from hearth to hearth. Abigail Corr walks in the woods at night. She carries a pagan coin. She brings the old world's curse across the sea. When Reverend Paris preached at sunset, his voice cracked the rafters like a whip. "Even the heathens of Rome knew the wages of witchcraft," he thundered. "Their Vestal harlots were buried alive, for the earth itself must swallow corruption. Shall we, a godly people, do less?" The crowd muttered, fear and righteousness entwining like thorn vines. Paris's eyes sought Abigail in the back pew and held her there, pinning her with a gaze sharp as a blade. The villagers turned to look, one by one, until the air itself seemed to lean against her chest. When the service ended, she felt their breath following her into the dark. 2 nights later the constable came with a lantern and iron chains. Snow fell in slow, soundless sheets as they led her through the village. Doors cracked open, eyes gleamed like animals in the gloom. In the meeting house the fire hissed and popped, but the air was colder than the night outside. Paris stood at the head of the chamber, Bible in one hand, the other raised as though to summon judgment from the rafters. "You keep the Roman fire," he declared. "You defy the Lord with silence and secret prayers." Abigail lifted her chin. "I have spoken no curses. I have harmed no soul. Even pagans knew such sin deserves burial," Paris said, his voice smooth with triumph. "We will not spill your blood, for blood sanctifies the ground. The earth itself shall pass the sentence." A murmur rippled through the villagers, uneasy, yet none dared speak against him. Fear was a current stronger than pity. They dragged her from the meeting house to the hill where gallows once stood. Frost gleamed on the barren earth, moonlight catching on the spade blades of men already digging. The pit gaped black and breathless, a cellar cut into the frozen soil. No rope hung there, no stake, only the dark mouth of the ground. Mary Warren followed at a distance, face pale as milk. She pressed her hands together, whispering prayers that dissolved into sobs. Abigail met her gaze for a heartbeat and offered the faintest of smiles, a fragile grace that broke something in the girl's chest. They bound Abigail's wrists and lowered her into the hollow. Cold bit through her thin shoes, climbed her bones like ice-born ivy. The men set down a crust of bread, a single jug of water, a lantern whose flame wavered as if afraid. Paris intoned a final scripture, the words rolling like distant thunder. Then the plank slid across the opening, shutting out the moon, shutting out the world. Darkness pressed against her skin, heavy and absolute. She listened to the muffled scrape of shovels, the thud of packed earth. Each heartbeat grew slower, as if time itself were sinking with her. She thought of her grandmother's stories, of women who tended flames so that cities might live, of the countless names buried without witness across centuries. She touched the bronze token, its surface warm against her palm though no light remained. In that silence she felt the echo of London's bells, the whispers of women whose graves had no markers, whose truths were smothered by stone and soil. Above, the village settled into uneasy sleep. Snow covered the ground where she lay, erasing footprints, softening the edges of the earth. When dawn came, only a faint rise in the frozen field betrayed the cellar beneath. Paris wrote a single line in the record book, then struck it through until the parchment bore nothing but a scar of ink. Mary Warren returned alone after nightfall, standing motionless as the wind hissed over the hill. She pressed her palm to the ground, the cold seeping through her skin, and whispered Abigail's name though she knew no one would ever speak it again. Centuries later, scholars turning the brittle pages of Salem's archives would find a gap where a verdict should be, a silence wider than any confession. And not a single page in the kingdom's or the colony's history dared to speak their names again.